because I wanted to skip the standard slides relatively fast, and that's one of the feedback what we've got from our survey as well. Now, opportunities to participate within the community. So please, if you're interested on gaining visibility or being an MVP in the future, these are great opportunities for you to do a live demo. So if you build something cool, you tested something cool, you have a technical solution or architecture, and you want to demonstrate that for the rest of the community, these are great opportunities for you to do that and get some visibility for you as well. And even though you wouldn't be interested on getting the MVP status, you might want to show your stuff and get some feedback on your solution. You can always also contribute in a GitHub. Those contributions are more than welcome. We have a pretty large open source GitHub sample collection already. I think we're hitting 500 samples pretty soon. Some of them are pretty old, and some of might be considered as outdated, but then there's plenty of new stuff as well. So it's not like everything is definitely outdated. And on the other hand, even some of the, in quotes, outdated stuff, they're 100% might be 100% valid for SharePoint 2013 for on-prem. So we're not really taking anything away, because the SharePoint community has quite a few versions which we actually support and build stuff on. I'm going to touch that a few times today and during the presentation. And the last thing is to provide feedback. So please keep on providing feedback, having discussions, and providing feedback related on our surveys and what's missing, and especially when there's stuff in dev preview, please let us know using the issue list if you run into any bugs or if something isn't working properly. It's super valuable for us to be able to address your concerns or address your bugs as fast as possible. And obviously, if there's any critical bugs as well, please let us know as well. Now, today I have a few slides on the general announcement and update section related on what has happened within the last week, kind of pinpointing a few topics from there, and then we kind of concentrate on the SharePoint 2019 development platform. So really walk through where we are with that. There are some known issues related on that, so we're going to talk about those today as well, which were planned to get fixed. Obviously, SharePoint 2019 RTM'd pretty recently. SharePoint Framework 1.7 when it was released pretty recently, and now we're finding a few things here and there which we need to still adjust, and I will cover all of those through today, so we get a clear clarification where we are with this platform and what you should be aware of. Now, we're not seeing a massive uptake on SharePoint 2019 from a development perspective yet, because it is still quite a new platform. So it was released only a few weeks ago. But we can. There was already discussions. For example, I was in a Office 365 Connect conference this week, yesterday, and there was numerous partners who already were planning their migration activities for SharePoint 2019, which will happen then early next year. So they're already growing to use the SharePoint 2019, and they need to understand what's available there. Now, a few standard slides. This shouldn't take too long. So AKMS SPDev Docs, our documentation platform, we have 960,000 views in October, which is pretty cool. And a good, it might be that we'll break the 1 million in November. To be fair, the Thanksgiving is coming in November quite soon, so most likely we will not actually break the 1 million. So the October 960 will be the record for now. But that it shows that there's some valuable information, or it shows that people need to have a lot of documentation related on SharePoint, which is probably both, because SharePoint is a interesting and an extremely large beast, so to say, and there's certain elements which you always need to go back into documentation and check them out, and what stuff is actually supported and how to implement certain things. Now, running into issues, we are significantly falling behind of this issue list tracking. We do have an active team in China who's helping us on the labeling this, but we in engineering, we really are looking into investing more and more time on helping you with the issues. And I'll come back on this one when we talk about the roadmap on the SharePoint development after a few slides. But technically, if you run into any developer or extensibility related issues, please report them using the AKMS SPDev issue. This is issue list in SPDev Docs, and this is really for you to tell For example, that you're hitting a standard API and suddenly the API surface or the response has been changed and this is not what you were expecting, and then we can actually loop that internally to the right people. That's super, super important for us to know what has happened and then also fix those things. If your whatever issue you're running into is not developer oriented, it's an out-of-the-box functionality. One out-of-the-box web part seems to be working weirdly. Please use the standard support channels in the tenant admin UI. So as a tenant administrator, you can go to the tenant admin UI and open a support ticket, and based on the priority of the ticket, it will be then routed to the right people. The non-developer oriented issues, we cannot route them using the internal channels. If they're getting added on the GitHub, we are forced to close them to our internal agreement within the SharePoint engineering. So just setting the scenes on that one. Now, going back on the new stuff, so not just repeating those slides and the intros, but SharePoint Framework was released, the 1.7 was released a week ago on Thursday, so pretty much few hours after our community call, the SharePoint Framework community call, and I got some comments on the Twitter on that one, because in the community call I said, well, this is going to happen in a matter of days rather than weeks. Obviously, I could not have said that it will happen in a matter of hours, because it would have kind of given away when the release will happen. Now, we wanted to release the SharePoint Framework 1.7 way before the Thanksgiving, so there will be time for us to fix if there's any findings related on 1.7, which we need to address as fast as possible. We are potentially looking into releasing 1.7.1 still during this calendar year, which will be mainly a kind of a bug fixing release. So it will not actually move any of the preview capabilities to GA, but it will address some of the late findings or the findings which we have now found in the 1.7. So that would be 1.7.1, which is then the in quotes bug fixing release potentially still during this year. And I'll come back on the schedules and everything else after that. But a lot of the stuff the 1.7 was one of the biggest releases we've been having in the SharePoint Framework, and it's valid. For example, AC Andrew Connell's commented on his blog post that, well, it's a big release, but a lot of the stuff is in preview, which is absolutely correct. And we want to bring all of the new capabilities first to preview, and then from preview to the GA, so we can reduce the potential issues in production. So we can actually ensure that whenever we go to the GA with those capabilities, we do not break you. And so there is a thinking behind of this, that's why they go to the dev preview. And obviously, the big thing here is the Microsoft Teams tab. Development alignment, so you can use the exact same code base as a SharePoint Framework web part or surface the exact same code as a Microsoft Teams tab. And note maybe on that one, just to clarify that if you are more end-user driven thinking and not just a developer, you can absolutely surface SharePoint pages as such already as a Microsoft Teams tabs, or you can surface individual sites as a Microsoft Teams tab. But this option with SharePoint Framework is that you're actually surfacing the LOB or the line of business or your custom solution as as a web part or as a Microsoft Teams tab. So either way, you can surface the same thing in multiple locations. And the thinking behind of this is that we give the end users or the customers the option to decide, will they want to use the Microsoft Teams or will they want to use the SharePoint as their platform. But regardless of that, you as a developer can expose the same capability in both sites, which is super important. And that's definitely the most important one here. The dynamic data went GA, so that's now generally available for custom web parts. So you will see also the first-party web parts most likely by end of this year still, even though there's a holiday season starting pretty soon in US. You will see some of the first-party web parts exposing data. So like a list view web part will start exposing this item has been selected, and then your custom web part can select or connect itself to that selection in the list view web part or library web part. So all of that is coming still by end of this year. Good. Now, One of the things which we actually talked about on a Tuesday's call as well, I wasn't on a Tuesday call because I was in Amsterdam in the Office 365 Connect conference, but one of the questions which we wanted to have some feedback, we actually got 58 submissions or replies already on this one. I haven't really collected the full set of feedback, is the question around, do we have too many calls? Should we reduce the amount of activities and the community calls in the SharePoint development, or should we keep on using them? Because, for example, this week we have 2 calls. So typically we have every single week the Thursday 7 a.m. PST call, and then we have also the monthly community call, which is meant to be more, let's say, collective what has happened within a month, and then on these calls we deep dive on a specific topic, like on a SharePoint Framework or open source initiatives which we are running under the SharePoint engineering. Now, your feedback is welcome, obviously, in the IM window as well, but I would actually ask you to go to the AKMS SP Dev call feedback and get your votes in there. We're collecting, it's a really simple question. There's like 2 questions and a free text form where you're able to then write your opinion. It is an anonymous survey, so if you don't like somebody, you can actually be pretty rude on that one for him or her. It doesn't really matter if you want to write something, some messages for the people. Not really asked you to do that, obviously, but we really want to get your input related on, should we reduce the number of calls? Do you have any alternative ideas how we should tackle the amount of information what we are also providing? And technically, obviously, I've been thinking this in a way that we have multiple different calls, we have multiple different videos, we have multiple different ways of communicating, because there's multiple different ways of consuming all of this information what we're sending. And reality is that there's no way for any community or community person really to stay up to date on all of the materials what we're shipping, and we're not really expecting everybody to be up to date, and that's one of the reasons why we repeat on a lot of these messages, so that if you catch one of those messages one time, you're able to then actually understand where we're heading and why we're heading a certain way. But anyway, so please answer the survey so we get your input on the calls, and we'll probably come up with a slightly larger community survey at some point to understand what would be your thinking, where we should be driving and heading with this community. Our usage numbers are growing insanely fast. The community is growing insanely fast. Again, at some points, SharePoint development wasn't cool. It's clearly cool again, because you can actually use the same tools to also do development for Microsoft Teams in the future and for other applications. But that's it for that one. So let's actually move on the slides. Now, SharePoint Dev roadmap. So 1.7 came out last Thursday. What was released on 8th of November. I think it was 8th of November, last Thursday. And that had a native support for SharePoint 2019. It had a dynamic data GA, and then numerous preview capabilities like alignment with Microsoft Team experiences. Now, the next steps what we are concentrating, we're not actually pinpointing or calling out exact capabilities in the list, except what's now in the dev preview, but we're really looking into as the whole engineering. We're looking into stabilization and performance optimization throughout the APIs and the UI layer. So we do know that there has been some scalability issues, there has been some performance issues related on the API surface, and we're really looking into optimizing that stuff. There are certain areas in the SharePoint CSAM API or REST API surface where you can, as an example, you can achieve the same end result using multiple ways, and if you use one of those ways, it might actually cause a significant SQL Server impact. But if you use it an alternative way, it will not cause that. So we're trying to update the documentation. We're trying to optimize the code that it always uses the more optimized ways of actually doing stuff, which will then reduce the 429s and all of those exceptions in the platform as well. So performance optimization, big things, stabilization, big things. Obviously, big thing for SharePoint Framework and SharePoint Platform perspective is also getting the SPFx dev preview capabilities shipped. And then there is a continuous flow of additional capabilities coming in. So like let's say mecha menu, and how do we then adjust that mecha menu from an API perspective, or additional UI settings like the footer settings, the static out-of-the-box footer settings, or the header settings, which we demonstrated in Ignite. So there's a lot of small, pretty significant features coming up from a UI and branding and all of that perspective as well, which we will be then releasing gradually. Now, we haven't set a date yet for the 1.8 release of SharePoint Framework, so we don't yet disclose any exact dates on that. But you might expect, so let me explain this in a understandable way. So we just released, it was November 8th, we released in the 1.7, and we wanted to release that release way before Thanksgiving, so we actually get it out and potentially release a hot fix, so 1.71, before the holiday season starts. We are not looking into releasing any actual larger capabilities during the holiday season. So you can expect us not to release anything during December, and only after next year, early January, mid-January, maybe potentially early February, you can expect this following version, then larger version coming out, which would be then a SharePoint Framework 1.8 as an example, which will then GA some of the functionalities as well. The same actually applies for site designs and a lot of the branding capabilities and a lot of that stuff. So during the December timeframe, you can expect us not to release anything really significant, because we don't want to break anything. The reason for that one is quite simply, it's the same that why you should never ever ship anything into production on Friday 5 p.m. And why is that? Because if you do that, it's Murphy's Law that something's going to fail and you lose your weekend, or it's going to be a long-lasting Friday. So we don't want to compromise people's vacation and holiday season, and we also want to make sure that you don't have to actually push, well, obviously more selfish reasons, but it's good for you as well, so there won't be too many new stuff coming on the holiday season, so you can concentrate on the family as well. Now, and in general, to be fair, the SharePoint Framework 1.0, the reason why we want to actually concentrate also on the stabilization and optimization is that we're kind of I wouldn't say that we're ready, definitely not ready. We will add capabilities based on your feedback. We will add new Office 365 services, which you can customize using SharePoint Framework. So we're not really ready, but we are starting to be in a good position with SharePoint Framework. So you can actually already do cool customizations. We certainly need to have new placeholders. We certainly need to have new functionalities in the modern experiences, but the SharePoint Framework itself is in a relatively good shape. So there's multiple set of functionalities which we've been releasing during the past year, which are fulfilling the requirements what customers have been having. So the graph access, the custom API access, the tenant-wide deployment of extensions, and all of those things are really, really valuable, and they're fulfilling that basic set of scenarios, which is great to see that we're getting to this level already. Now, thank you, Nigel, for the less code comment. So let's actually move into the SharePoint 2019 development. Oh, and there's a nice typo. That was me writing that slide, and that was the last slide which I wrote just before this call on this presentation. Now, what I wanted to do with this one is because the 2019 was released, so SharePoint 2019 RTM'd pretty recently. You can already get it. You can download it. You can use your Microsoft MSDN keys or your company keys to actually then get the license and install to your environments. But I wanted to explain what's actually included in the SharePoint 2019, what's supported, what's not supported. And like I said earlier in this call, there are some known issues, some which unfortunately found as late as today, which we need to address as soon as possible. And it's better that you are aware of those issues rather than you will run into them and then start wondering, is it you or who's actually failing at this point? Now, and I wanted to actually start with this kind of classic slide, which is kind of a walking through the SharePoint 2019 development options. And just to be super clear, we cover all of the different development options what we have in 2019. So certainly farm solutions are 100% still supported in SharePoint 2019. And we're not taking any functionalities away from the farm solutions. Sure, Some APIs might be changed, and we'll come back on the documentation slightly later on this presentation. But it's 100% supported in SharePoint 2019. We're not planning to take farm solution support away. So if you have any existing solutions, any existing SharePoint farms, you can update those to use SharePoint 2019 relatively easily. And I'll come back on the tooling and all of that slightly later as well. Now, the only thing what you might want to consider here is that the modern experiences, if we think about the farm solution, technically modern experiences do support farm solutions, but the modern experiences are not really aware of the farm solutions. So there isn't really a functionality in the modern team sites or modern communication sites where you could plug in, for example, a custom farm solution web part. Those are not visible in the modern experiences. If it's a SharePoint Framework web part, it is visible. Or if you would pushing a custom master page to a modern site, well, it's going to be ignored because custom master pages are not the way to brand a modern team sites in SharePoint Online or in the SharePoint 2019. Now, and that's why I kind of put the modern experiences in a blocked section because it's not really technically farm solutions. Sure, the modern experiences, it doesn't mix and match. Let's put it this way. It doesn't break anything, but it doesn't really work either. Now, the second option, sandbox solutions. So in SharePoint Online, we removed the code behind support for sandbox solutions a few years back, or 1.5 years back. Our good friend in this call, Patrick Rogers, had a big role on helping all of the customers on this transition, and it was relatively painful transition, and we do still apologize on the missed communication potential in that one. In on-premises, if you are using code behind sandbox solutions, which would be slightly a surprise actually, because they're not that widely used in on-premises, those are still actually technically supported. So you're able to enable that service and you're able to use them. You can absolutely use declarative sandbox solutions. They are supported also in SharePoint Online. So you can enable declarative sandbox solutions. And what that means is that you have a sandbox solution which does not contain an assembly. If the sandbox solution contains an assembly, then it's a code behind sandbox solution, and those are not supported. Now, the third thing here is SharePoint add-ins, absolutely still 100% supported. Anything what you had built for SharePoint 2013 or SharePoint 2016 are still working in SharePoint 2019 platform as well. So no changes from a add-in model perspective. The only thing here which I added as a question mark, that's actually a question mark for myself, because I'm not 100% sure if we got the add-in support for modern experiences for SharePoint 2019. So just to be clear on that one, in SharePoint Online, if you have a modern experiences, we will actually expose the custom add-ins as a web part in the web part picker. But in the on-premises, I can't remember which version and when did we enable that in SharePoint Online. So I need to come back on that one and verify that, and we'll update the documentation in the docs based on that conclusion. So I'll just double check that one, so I didn't want to guess the situation. And then the final piece, I need to come back on Chris Kent's comment there. The final piece there is the SharePoint Framework, which is then meaning that the customization is running as part of the SharePoint page. So it's not running in an iframe like the add-ins are running in an iframe. It is a flexible web part and extension experience, so you're able to embed these things on the modern pages as well. It runs under the permission of a current user, so the JavaScript which is running there is running based on the permissions of the user, and it's an industry standard development model, which is true. It's now finally we are aligning the SharePoint development with what other people are also doing, and not just having our own SharePoint specific development model. Well, you heard about this one probably in the past as well. Now, one point here to notice, the SharePoint Framework development absolutely supported in SharePoint 2019. Modern experiences, yes, for web parts and extensions. The classic experience is for web parts. So you're able to actually build SharePoint Framework web parts, and they do work on the classic experience, but the extensions do not work in the classic experience. So that's the piece which is kind of I wouldn't say debatable, but it's partially supported. Now, Chris Kent had an awesome comment actually on the IAM window related on the fact that 100% supported does not mean 100% recommended, and that's absolutely correct. So to be fair, and I understand this, I've been working with SharePoint for so many years, and everybody is always looking, what is the Microsoft official recommendation? Which of these I should be using? The obvious answer is that, well, technically it depends. It depends on what the customer is asking, what is meant to be implemented. If possible, you should be using SharePoint Framework, but it might be that they're asking an API, they're asking a customization or hitting an API which is not exposed in on-premises. So let's say something which isn't exposed using a REST API or a CSAM API. You would like to use that or implement stuff using SharePoint Framework, but it's not exposed, then you are basically restricted to implement something as a farm solution. In those kind of scenarios, though, I don't have a slide on this one, but I'm trying to explain this in Finnish. In those kind of scenarios, what I would personally recommend as a old consultant, hands-on solved this in the adding model timeframe as well, I would actually implement my own custom SVC, so service, web API, how would I put it? I would actually implement a farm solution, and the farm solution's only purpose is to expose that API which is missing. And then I would actually implement the UI still based on SharePoint Framework and not using a classic web parts just because of that one API limitation. Because that would actually give me the opportunity of still using SharePoint Framework, which is fluent, it's performant, it's super flexible, and it's aligned on the future of SharePoint. Sure, we still need to have a farm solution to expose that API surface, but how often would you change that farm solution? Because the one and really the biggest pain point with farm solutions is the updates, where they do work properly if you know how the farm solutions should be upgraded and how they are upgraded and what you can do with that. So having a farm solution, having a farm solution which just exposes additional APIs using SVC or a custom web API means that you don't actually update that. You're just exposing the API surface. But your customization, which is running as a SharePoint Framework solution, is then the one which is evolving much faster than the farm solution. This way, you don't have to schedule service breaks for the farm that often. You don't have to make maintenance breaks for the farm, which would be the case if you're using a classic farm solutions. Now, but all of this is debatable. So it's really, there's no right or wrong, and so you shouldn't really be like, hey, we should do this because Microsoft says that we have to do always this, and that's not correct. It always depends on the requirements. Now, moving on things. So this is a slide which we showed related on the dev preview, on SharePoint 2019 dev preview. And this is a high-level summary on how to get started with SharePoint 2019 as well. So I updated this based on the latest changes. So you can, I didn't update the link. Download SharePoint 2019, and I do apologize, that link is still pointing to a wrong location. I don't think we have actually, let me do this. You can probably see my edit, hopefully. I can't remember what is the link, but you can actually download SharePoint 2019. There is a Microsoft download link behind of that. There is a Windows Server VMs available, at least in Azure. Technically 2019, I don't think that's available yet in the Microsoft Azure as a VM, but it should be available relatively soon. And what I did personally in my environment is that I basically created an Azure VM based on the Windows Server 2016, and then in that VM I downloaded SharePoint 2019 and set up all of the other stuff in there. Now, then you need to enable adding model to be able to use SharePoint Framework or add-ins, and that's really a key point. And this, you need to have the app service application enabled. You need to have add subscription setting service application, and I'll come back on this one in a slides in a second, so you're aware what it actually means. And so there is a PowerShell commands how to make that happen. Now that somebody is asking the link for SharePoint, downloading SharePoint 2019. It is here we go. There is a link in here. Now, all of the, by the way, presentations are shared when we release a summary and recording of this video, and the presentations will be released as part of that blog post as well. That blog post will be available in the SharePoint dev blog, and the SharePoint dev blog URL is following, so you can actually access that from there. So you can then download the PPTX files as well. Now, and this is a really important thing to remember. So you need to actually also enable the app domain in the farm. And even though you wouldn't be using the SharePoint add-ins, this is required because the SharePoint framework actually uses the add-in infrastructure to get the functionalities deployed in the site level. So if you do not enable the app domain, you will see an exception. I will show that in the upcoming slides as well, so you're aware of that. And then you obviously install the basic setup of SharePoint Framework. So you install the Node.js and all of that. You install the SharePoint Framework 1.7 version. And whenever we are then using the or asking the which version environment, we actually choose the 2019 and onwards. And then your solution is created against the right SharePoint Framework versioning. If you're building SharePoint Framework. Obviously, if you're implementing Visual Studio, I'll come back on that one. If you're doing farm solutions or sandbox solution, I'll come back on that one in a second. And good point from Joel. David typically has a summary of all of the links and everything else in 2 minutes after this call in Twitter. I don't know how he does that, but it's just amazing. Now, on SharePoint 2019 dev platform, just to be 100% sure, there are certain things which are not supported and certain things which are supported. So let me explain. I didn't create a slide on this one explaining why these are limited or not. But the reason why certain things are not supported is that at the time when we took SharePoint Online Codebase and forked the SharePoint Online Codebase and created SharePoint 2019, those capabilities were not released yet. So that means that they are not available in SharePoint 2019. The whole SharePoint 2019 is actually forked from SharePoint Online, and that's insanely cool when you think of it. So SharePoint 2019 is roughly the same version what we had in SharePoint Online back in January this year. Only what we did though is that we got rid of all of the functionalities which has a cloud dependencies like Azure or any other cloud functionality. And that means that all of the functionalities which were not released by that time, which is roughly January this year, are not included in SharePoint 2019 because they were not available when we forked the code. So it's kind of logical, but that means that, for example, like Chris Kent's comment, the view formatting is not supported in SharePoint 2019 because it wasn't really ready and released at that point. Now, what's supported? Let's actually have a look on this one. So the modern and classic pages. So I want to be clear here as well. So this is not just about the modern experiences. All of the classic templates, site definitions are still there. So you can do classic pages, you can do modern pages, you can do modern sites, which means modern team sites or a modern communication site. The modern subsites are always a modern team site. So just to be clear on that one, there is no modern sub communication site. What would it be? Communication site which is a subsite. So technically there is so you can create a new site collection using a modern team site which doesn't have a group associated to it, so it's a modern looking team site or a communication site, and then you can create a subsite which is always a modern team site, so or any other classic site. But you cannot create a communication site as a subsite. That option is not exposed from the UI. Now, SharePoint Framework extensions are available. SharePoint Framework web parts obviously are available as well. Webhooks are available. Asset packaging is available. This is a huge thing because the asset packaging means that you don't need to worry about where your code is being hosted because it's being hosted automatically from the app catalog. A big thing because you basically just package your code and you're good to go with the customization. Tenant scope deployment is supported. So if you are looking into having your web part available in all of the sites within the farm, you can enable that by having a setting in the package solution JSON file, and that will enable that web part in that solution in the form automatically. And ALM APIs are available as well for you to automate installations of operations, installations of add-ins or installations of SharePoint Framework solutions in your form. Not supported, site designs are not supported, so we will have a modern UIs for creating sites. I'm going to show that one still today. There's quite a few slides about actually what I prepared, but let me show those absolutely the UI as well. Hub sites not available. Hub sites were not available at the time when the code base was forked. So if you want to have a consistent similar kind of a hub navigation or whatever, you would have to implement that using a SharePoint Framework extension. Luckily, the extensions are supported. Tenant properties not available. Custom modern themes are not available. This is a pity. So what it means is that the modern themes are available for modern theme sites and communication sites, but you cannot modify them. You cannot add a custom modern themes for the modern sites, and that is a nasty limitation, which I absolutely understand, and we're looking into potentially enabling that at some point, but there's no promises when and if what capabilities will be further released on SharePoint 2019, or will it be the next version for on-premises? We don't know. Will we have a next version on SharePoint in on-premises? I don't know. I'm not the person who's making those decisions. Site collection app catalog also is not available. Technically, the capability was available in the SharePoint Online, but the site collection app catalog in the code, it has a dependency on a tenant level, tenant subscriptions services, and that's not available in on-premises. So we were unable to get the site collection app catalog to work in on-premises. Now, the SharePoint 2019 SharePoint Framework, the third-party version is 1.4.x, and the reason why I'm saying 1.4.x is that it's actually a combination of 1.4 and 1.4.1. But you don't really need to know about this as long as you install yourself a SharePoint Framework 1.7 and you choose your target to be SharePoint 2019, it will create you a solution with the right settings. That's basically what happens behind the scenes, and I can show that quickly today as well. Now, these are the things what we kind of quickly went through, and like I said, slides will be shared tomorrow after when the blog post go lives in the SharePoint Dev platform, so you can actually copy these things as well. When you set up your initial SharePoint 2019 environment, if you're a developer and you don't really worry about these things, I know that Spencer Harper or something wouldn't like me to say this, but as an example, personally, I wanted to concentrate on this farm just to get it up and running. So I just used the configuration wizard to get everything up and running with the default settings, because I'm using my example farm just for demos, so I didn't optimize the farm using whatever optimization rules. But after that, you still need to enable the site subscription settings service that is not created by default, and this is required for the add-in infrastructure, because the add-in infrastructure again is required for SharePoint Framework to work. So we need to first create an app catalog, then we need to create the subscription settings service in the farm, and then we need to go and set the app URL either using PowerShell or using the UI. And I just added that as an image on the slide as well. So if you're running into this, hey, my solution, I can't install my SharePoint Framework solution, double check that you have the subscription settings service application created and you have the app URL enabled in the farm. So after that, this thing will start working. And it's, how would I put it? It's a nasty limitation because SharePoint Framework solutions has nothing to do with app URLs. But the code inside of the SharePoint 2019, the server-side code is basically checking that, and it is not allowing you to deploy anything on the site unless the app URL has been set. And sure, we should have fixed that, but we didn't, and that's now in RTM. So it's something to know when you're setting up the farm. The other things that I wanted to actually cover in here, the CSAM, SharePoint 2019 Nuket CSAM API is out. It is a evolved client-side object model from SharePoint 2016. It's basically the same CSAM as it was for SharePoint Online in January this year, except the tenant level settings. Again, because tenant level operations are for tenants, and we don't have a tenant object in the on-premises. We have a farm object, and it's slightly different. There is a NuGet package which is available named Microsoft SharePoint 2019 CSAM. It is a version 16.0 10,337. If you did test anything using the dev preview, this might be slightly confusing because the RTM version is actually lower than the dev preview version. That was a decision which somebody took in Redmond. I don't know why, and I don't quite understand what happened, but it is a slightly lower version, but that's fine. You can actually see only one version right now available from NuGet for this one. Now, there is a known issue related on this one. First, we're not planning to release a SharePoint 2019 client-side SDK as an MSI. The problem with the MSI, that MSI setting, is that installs those assemblies in the global assembly CAG, and you should never ever do that, because those global assembly CAG assemblies override the local assemblies which you might actually use from a NuGet package, and that's not the right way how you should be doing development. So that's the reason why we don't release an MSI for this one. Now, there is a known issue related on this one. On the NuGet package, the tenant object is in the CSAM to enable you the capability of creating site collections using client-side object model. That object does work for SharePoint 2019, even with the version which is included in this NuGet package, but it is in a different namespace as it was in SharePoint 2016. And that's actually complicating most likely our upgrade, so we're looking into fixing that one and releasing a new version of this NuGet package relatively soon. Other than that, this already works without any problems. There's a good question related from Kamal on the SharePoint Designer for SharePoint 2019. Answer is no, we're not looking into releasing SharePoint Designer for SharePoint 2019. Technically, the SharePoint Designer 2013 should still work for SharePoint 2019 as well, but not against the modern sites. So those are blocked from SharePoint Designer. And the SharePoint Designer isn't really a future-proven way of customizing SharePoint. So it is, somebody wrote a SharePoint destroyer in the IAM window, and that's technically what could happen with the SharePoint Designers as well. Now, PnP components, this question is coming up quite often. What is the PnP component support for SharePoint 2019? Right now, we do not have a PnP PowerShell or PnP CSAM core for SharePoint 2019. We're looking into working on that one during the holiday season, so we're finally getting that one up and running. The team has been forced to prioritize some other things as well, and this is surprisingly time-consuming thing to rethink all of our build processes to get the SharePoint 2019 included. This is estimated roughly. We were talking yesterday with Erwin van Hoonen in Amsterdam around the schedules. We're looking into potentially getting it in the January release of PnP, but we'll see when it's available. Really depends on what surprises we will run into. We'll still need to fix first the CSAM NuGet package for SharePoint 2019, and then after that we can start working on this one. Now, Visual Studio 2017 support is in Visual Studio 2017 tooling. The new version of the Visual Studio 2017, which was released on Monday or Tuesday, is supporting SharePoint 2019. So already at this point, which is great, we actually fixed this in a matter of weeks. We're already supporting SharePoint 2019. So if you have a farm solution built for SharePoint 2016, you want to test how to migrate that or upgrade that to the SharePoint 2019, we are supporting that in a Visual Studio side. Or if you want to create a clean farm solution for SharePoint 2019, you can already do that with the latest version of Visual Studio 2017 tooling. I do not think we will be releasing this upgrade for Visual Studio 2015, unless I'm completely mistaken, but it's already 2018, so it's kind of understandable as well. Technically, these tools and these templates do not really contain anything new, so it's only a version pump to support the right version behind of the scenes as a SharePoint 2019 version. SharePoint Framework support, we talked about this one already. SharePoint 2019 supports as part of SharePoint 2019 support as part of SharePoint Framework 1.7, so you can install the 1.7. After that, you will get an environmental selection, and there you can then choose the SharePoint 2019 as the platform, and then that will provision you the right looking solution. Now, however, we found a new bug earlier today based on our testing team found out unfortunately way too late, this bug, because 1.7 came out a week ago within the SharePoint 2019 SharePoint 2019 a few weeks ago. So if you are selecting a React as your JavaScript framework option in the Yeoman template, it actually provisions you a solution which is referencing React 16, and that does not work in SharePoint 2019. And this is a limitation, it's a clear bug which we will be fixing, and this is one of the reasons why there will be SharePoint Framework 1.7.1, most likely by end of this year. Hopefully relatively soon, so we can get this one fixed. Technically, what it means is that if you're looking into doing React-based components for SharePoint 2019, right now what you should be doing is to provision or scaffold your project by choosing the no JavaScript framework, and then reference those right React 15 components inside of the solution afterwards. So the default scaffolding is doing this stuff in a wrong way, but we can fix that by not using the default scaffolding, rather manually build the whole thing. Good. That's it. Now we're getting finally on the quick demo part. Next step for the SharePoint 2019 development. Well, the tooling is pretty much there. We're looking into fixing the bugs, which we know, which are unfortunate, but unfortunately we are human beings as well, so mistakes do happen. Then we're looking into fixing or improving our documentation. And this really requires your input as well. So we need to understand how much documentation is actually required, what is the demand for the documentation, but bare minimum, we're looking into doing a proper API documentation refresh. So we're looking into having a CSAM API documented for SharePoint 2019, and also the server-side API documented for SharePoint 2019. And obviously the information which you're seeing in this slide deck, which we went through today, will be transformed to the documentation side of SharePoint docs. So you can clearly go back on the official docs and see what was the hub side supported or not, and we clearly explained that it's not supported as an example. But really the other documentation, which is the kind of a conceptual documentation, what you can do with SharePoint 2019, this is where we need your input. What kind of documentation is needed, and we need to understand the demand on that, because we don't want to invest our documentation resources for doing stuff which is not actually important for the community. So we need to prioritize people's time here as well. Now let's quickly do a demo here. A lot of slides, I do apologize on that, but I wanted to actually walk through the whole stack and make sure that we touch all of the different components and all of the different elements. And let me actually share my screen, and we can quickly have a look on how does the SharePoint look like. We'll have a look on the site provisioning. We'll have a slightly look on the customizations as well, and how these things are actually working. So let me actually get in here, and let's start with a central admin. I need to probably share my screen. That typically, if you click the share button, that typically helps. Thank you, David, for input on that one. Now, somebody needs to confirm when we get the UI visible.
Loading.
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 Louis got it. Chris got it.
I got it.
Excellent. So let's start with a central admin. Obviously, central admin, not really a development functionality, but it is the way how we control the farm. And if you're an architect and you're setting up or a team lead, you probably need to understand the basics. But like I mentioned, just quickly referencing these. So what I've done here is that after the initial execution of the configuration wizard, I've actually changed or installed the subscription setting service, and I missed an N apparently there as well. So it is actually a subscription setting service application, but when I'm creating that using PowerShell, you actually define a name for it. And you need to do that so that the adding platform is available for you to start using. You also need to have the app management service, but this is created by the configuration wizard. If you just run the basic wizard and let that create all of the service applications for you. If this would be an IT pro call, most likely some people would be jumping in the eye window and say, you should never use the configuration wizard. But if we concentrate on the developer platform, I think it's fair. We save some time. The second thing, like mentioned, Thank you, Todd. Oh, Todd Client on the call. Cool. And second thing to mention is that you need to absolutely have the app catalog created. So when we create the app catalog from central admin, it gives you the create a site collection, and basically we have to have that app catalog available, so we're able to upload then our solutions in this app catalog available. And maybe a few things. One thing to notice here, what I did, and just a quick tip. So I modified the view and added the skip feature deployment column here, and this means that is the solution tenant scoped deployed solution or not. In this case, no, and that means that this solution has to be manually installed on a site. Also, key point when you're uploading anything here is that your app package error message it says no errors, so you know that it's actually available to be used. Good, and then let's get back on. Where was it? Here we go. And the final thing is, and like I said, this is a slightly nasty, but you need to have an app domain available here. Otherwise, you can't activate even SPFx solutions available in the site level. After all of this is actually done, we can then go, for example, let's go, well, actually, let's do this. Let's create a new site. So if I go, we have a SharePoint home, so we can see that we have an app launcher in the same way as we have in SharePoint Online. You can go to the SharePoint home, and we'll see a cool SharePoint home functionality here. I'm going to skip that one, and we can actually see that we have a modern site creation experience like in the SharePoint Online. The immediate follow-up questions at this point will be you would be raising your hand most likely and saying, excuse me, can I add additional site types here? And the answer is unfortunately no, you can't change this experience. So the options are mainly basically disable this functionality or then show a completely custom UI, but you don't have an option right now to add a third option as a site type. Now in here, if I choose a communication site, I will get a basic set of designs, and like we noticed, site designs and site scripts are not supported in SharePoint 2019, so you can't actually control what happens, or you can't modify the site creation flow from that perspective. If we call this SIG, let's actually create this. So we're creating a communication site. Site creation, though, is still fast because in the same way as with on SharePoint Online, this is super fast. It's based on the new implementation. It is not necessarily as fast in SharePoint Online because this is a VM which is running in my Azure, but in a matter of seconds, 1, 2, 3, 4, come on, we should have the communication site available. Really depends where my time jobs and the status is and all of that. Is there a native CSM way to create these sites? Answer is yes. So good point. So we can actually create communication sites and modern team sites. They are just like normal site design definitions. So as long as you create them using the right type, that's a good thing for us to actually document. To our docs how to create those. And now we have a communication site available in here. There's a good question. Let me actually show that one as well. So obviously the list and libraries, you can use the modern experience or you can use the classic experience. Let's create here a list and we're going to create that. That is by default in the modern experience, but we can always fall back on the classic experience in the same way as with SharePoint Online. There is the button or a link in the left navigation. Again, this is technically a fork from SharePoint Online from January this year or so. So it means that the same functionalities what were in the SharePoint Online earlier would be now available within the on-premises. In here, the question was related on Power Apps. The answer is no. The Power Apps modification and overrides is not available, and that's actually understandable because the Power Apps is a SharePoint Online capability. It's an online capability. It is not a service which would be available in the on-premises environment, so you can't override the setting. Todd, the fork date is not public knowledge, so I can't give you the exact date on that one. So, but it's somewhere around early this year is the fork date, unfortunately. Fair question, but I think I'm not allowed to actually say when exactly that happened. Now, On the settings, so this is already a slightly customized size. What I did with this side is that I added a SP 2019 capabilities client-side solution. This is something which we actually have available. So let me show you this as a demo. github.com/SharePoint SPDev solutions. So in the SPDev solutions repository, if I go to the solutions folder, we used to have here SPDev previous solution. It will be there relatively soon again. And from there, you can actually download then a SPPKG file, which you can use for testing the modern experiences. So in my case, I've already installed that in here. And that means that as an example, I have a custom footer included in my all of my pages within the site. So it doesn't really matter in the welcome page of the documents list. It will actually have that footer rendered there, or am I in the welcome page of the site? There is the footer actually rendered there as well. So that's the SharePoint Framework extension added in this level. Also, what that solution will contain is a simple custom web part and the source code for it, which is called a to-do web part, and it's using then the right version. I was technically planning to upgrade that solution earlier today, but then I ran into that React issue. So we found out that React issue earlier today, and that's the reason why that solution is not available right now from the GitHub. But here we have a sample SharePoint Framework web part running on a page. You can see that there's no really postbacks. It's a modern experience, it's a fluent experience, and I cannot do drop trash. I can add tasks, for example, to the task list behind of the scenes, and there's a fluent experience for doing this stuff, and I can manipulate things. This is a SharePoint Framework web part, which behind of the scenes is actually creating content in a task list in this team site. So there's now two items behind of the scenes. But basically the experience are pretty much the same within the modern team site and the communication sites as they were in the SharePoint Online earlier this year. One note here, we're slightly running out of time. I do apologize on that. But if I choose a subsite creation, the subsite creation obviously is still showing the classic way of creating subsites, so there's no modern subsite creation style because that's a relatively new thing in SharePoint Online. And the default option in the subsite creation is a team site without the classic experience option, and this is a modern team site. So basically you can select and create a modern team sites under a modern team sites or communication site. So now we can actually say here, for example, a SIG, and I can choose a team site, and let's actually create that. And let's call this SIG as well, special interest group. And creation of a modern team site is relatively fast as well. And there we go. We have a modern team site under the team site. Now, there's most likely, and we need to talk about this, the options later on. But if one logical question at this point would be that can I somehow magically control what are these templates which are visible in the selection? And technically you can actually control those. So if you would like to filter and only show the modern team site and not, for example, a classic blog or a classic project site or a classic document center site here, you can do that, you can control that, but that requires then a farm level configuration or farm level solution, which will then filter down what's visible in this selection. Now, and obviously, if there's a demand for all of those questions, we'll definitely provide guidance on how would you, as an example, filter down those list options and whatever settings has to be done for your customer deployment. But we really need to understand what would be the common questions, what people are having, common things, what they need to solve, so we can prioritize our time efficiently. There's a good question. I need to go back on the slides because we're slightly running out of time. I do apologize on that. Maybe just a quick note here to get a picture screenshot for David as well. is that in the, like mentioned, in the 15.9 version of the, which is the SharePoint 2019, sorry, Visual Studio 2017 latest version, which can live on Tuesday, it actually has now the SharePoint 2019 farm solution template, so you're able to actually already create farm solutions in Visual Studio using the classic template models. There is nothing new in these templates, it's just a version pump to support SharePoint 2019. Now, I'll actually flip back on the slides so we can go back on the content, and if needed, we'll absolutely walk through more SharePoint 2019 stuff in the future as well. This is kind of a quick run through everything what is supported, and 1 hour isn't a humongous amount of time. There is a question from Yuan around the SPFx 1.7 and above. Are you planning to add support for SharePoint 2016? Answer is no. We're not looking into upgrading SharePoint Framework support in SharePoint 2016. And people might be wondering on why. Well, SharePoint 2016 doesn't support modern experiences. So, and because SharePoint 2016 does not support modern experiences, modern pages, modern lists and libraries, we can't upgrade the SharePoint Framework version, which it would actually support as well. So we're not looking into changing the version support for SharePoint 2016. Right now in SharePoint 2019, the supported version is 1.4.x, like mentioned, and most likely it might be that there will be a version pump on that one with some future version, maybe for SharePoint 2019, but there has been no decisions, no plans related on that functionality. Thomas is asking, was possible SPFx custom footer also shown in the layout spaces? It is actually shown on the layout pages by default if the custom footer is available on the site. So it will override by default the layout spaces, like the site contents will actually show that footer as well. If it's not showing that, then it's a bug which we need to fix as well. Good. Sorry, Russell, for your brand new SharePoint 2016 server. Cool. Sorry for taking slightly above more than planned from a timing perspective. We really wanted to walk through the current status, all of the different things, because people do farm solutions, sandbox solutions, add-ins, and SharePoint Framework. The future is absolutely in SharePoint Framework, and we'll update our official documentation based on the information which you saw today on the slides as well. The recording of this session will be available in YouTube channel within 24 hours, and whenever that goes live, it goes live together with a blog post in our dev blog. And in the dev blog, SharePoint dev blog, let me actually paste that one more time there, where you can also find then a link to the presentation, so you're able to download the presentation which we used today as well, if you need that for a reference for anything for your own discussions or for your own development. But thank you everybody for joining. Thank you for staying slightly over time. I do apologize on my time management, 5 minutes over, not too bad, but still, and hopefully that was useful for the on-premises developers as well. We're not forgetting you. There is a big part of people who are doing on-premises deployments, and definitely please give the feedback, repeat, don't give up. We will listen as long as we know what is the demand for the on-premises guidance as well. It's not just about the cloud, or the cloud is the future. It's cloud first, but we want to make sure that the on-premises developers and on-premises SharePoint is still stable and usable for you as well. But thank you everybody. Recording will be out relatively soon, like I said, 24 hours. Thank you, bye-bye.